Hi, I'm Ron Jeffries with Jolly Pumpkin Artisan Ales in Dexter, Michigan. I was born in Michigan. I was born in the town that I live in now, Ann Arbor. I was born in a hospital that is no longer a hospital. It's a parking lot now, but it's next to a hospital, so that's the same. Things stay the same. I have lived outside of Michigan. I have lived outside of Ann Arbor, so I have not been there my entire life, but I was born, grew up there, went to the University of Michigan, moved away and came back because it's just a fantastic area, fantastic town. I decided to open my own brewery before I got into brewing professionally. I wanted to open a brewery. I didn't know anything about brewing. I started studying brewing science, convinced somebody to hire me in a brewery. I had to work 3 jobs when I started working in a brewery because you don't get paid a lot of money in the brewing industry. So I worked at a brew pub in Ann Arbor called Grizzly Peak. I opened one in Grand Rapids called Arena, one in Northville called Bonfire. I worked at a microbrewery called Brew Bakers for a short period of time. All these things really prepared me for opening Jolly Pumpkin. They were very busy brew pubs. I got to brew lots of beer, different batches of beer, experiment with hops and malts and different yeast varieties, and really tune in to what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go in brewing. But all that time, I had the goal and the vision of one day opening my own brewery. So every place I worked as if it were my brewery. I put everything into it, everything into the beers I was designing, training staff, whatever I was doing, 100% is what I gave. And it really prepared me for opening my own company. So Jolly Pumpkin, was it called Jolly Pumpkin from the beginning? No, not at all. That name came up quite a bit later. The styles of beer that we ended up doing came up quite a bit later as we went through the early years of the craft beer movement, and people moved from pale ales being out there to porters to stouts to IPAs, and it really refined our vision of what we wanted to do as a company as I was brewing all these beers throughout the years for other companies, and we could decide, make an intelligent decision on how we wanted to proceed with Jolly Pumpkin. We formed as an LLC in 2003 towards the end of the year, September, and started construction in Dexter, which is right down the road from Ann Arbor. That's what everybody asks, like, where's Dexter? It's like right outside of Ann Arbor. We could bike to work if we wanted. It's about 6 miles. You could walk to work if you wanted. Unfortunately, I'm usually in a rush, and I have a big truck that has to carry beer around a lot, so I don't get to do that very often. So we started construction January 2004, and by spring we were brewing beer, selling it in the summertime, and the fall of that year we took our first gold medal at the GABF. It was quite an honor. We always wanted to add a tap room or even a restaurant. We never had enough space. As our business grew, we got busier and busier. Space we had allocated for where we can one day put a tap room filled up with oak barrels, then conditioning beer, and then another suite in the building. It's kind of a big warehousey building divided into suites. Another suite opened up, and we blew through that wall, and okay, now we can have our tap room, and the next week it's full of barrels, and then we blow through another suite and another suite. As we've grown, the volume of beer that we've been producing has grown. We just haven't had room in our Dexter facility for a tap room or a restaurant. And some friends of ours that we had known for very many years approached us and said, why don't we form a partnership, and we can help you guys open up these restaurants that you've been thinking about doing for so many years. And our first restaurant brewery location we opened up outside of Traverse City on Mission Peninsula. Beautiful location. About 6 months after that we opened up one in Ann Arbor, right down the street from the brewery, probably 7 miles from the brewery in Dexter, and it's a fantastic location. We really focus on local ingredients at both of those spots, and we work with as many local growers as we can. The food is phenomenal. It's really been a great experience. All of the Jolly Pumpkin beers, 100% oak aged. We brew kind of normal brew from start to finish, mash, boil, add your hops. We have a whirlpool vessel now, go to that, rest, go into the fermenter. We do use open fermenter as a cool ship occasionally, but most of the time we use a traditional brewery heat exchanger to cool the wort down to a pitchable temperature for yeast. Pitch yeast right away. We have open steel fermenters that we use. They look like giant pots without lids, and we have a primary fermentation with our house yeast for all of our year-round beers. For our seasonal beers, we often bring in a specialty yeast for those. Just a regular fermentation. It's not sour at that point. We send samples out from that post-fermentation right there before it goes into the oak, it comes back pretty clean most of the time, as clean as probably most breweries. Just because the fermenter is open, that's not where we're making the sour beer. From there, we transfer into these oak barrels, and that is where the beer becomes sour. We have naturally occurring wild yeast and souring bacteria that exist in these barrels, and that's what sours the beer. Wild yeast is in the air, it's all around all the time, kind of like its less glamorous cousin mold, you know, it's floating around. And if you create an environment where it wants to live, where it would be happy, say in a barrel with some beer, that it could chew away at the sugars for a while, it'll eventually show up. Beer, wine, what have you. I mean, it's the bane of winemakers. It shows up everywhere. They hate to have it show up. But for me, that's what I wanted to do with Jolly Pumpkin. I knew to create those complexities, those flavors that we had talked about, I needed this naturally occurring wild yeast. I had done wild and sour style ales at some other breweries by buying wild yeast, by buying lactobacillus culture, and had never created the complexity that I was looking for. And in tasting other breweries from Europe that were doing these natural cultures, I knew that's what we had to get. We were fortunate enough that the wild yeast in Dexter tends to make pretty good beer, apparently. So that's where the souring happens. Barrel is a little misleading maybe, because while we do have well over 200, I don't remember, 250, 270, I don't know, number of smaller barrel-sized barrels, we do have some larger oak tons that we use, some 1,000, 2,000 liter, and we just brought in some 60 barrel oak aging tons, which we hope to get more of those as well. So everything is aged in oak, a lot in barrels right now, but as we grow and get bigger, these larger oak aging vessels are also very handy to use for aging the oak. We generally buy used barrels because they're a lot less expensive. So that means I have barrels from all over. Different beers go in different barrels, different types of wood, and I went to a lecture by Tommy Arthur a few years back, and it was really scientific. He did a lot of in-depth research into the oak and different types of wood and reactions that were occurring. I'm a little more touchy-feely than that, and I have certain types of oak and certain barrels from certain other producers that tend to work for different beers, and some that won't work in that beer won't work in this barrel, and it will in that. So, you know, we have kind of different names for the barrels, and different beers go into maybe blonde barrels, or they go into other sort of barrels. For example, you know, it's goofy. All breweries are goofy. You probably walked into breweries and you see the tanks that have weird names on them. You know, we've got one called Little Joe, and one called Shody, and you know, just goofy names. And particular beers go into those tanks because what we've found is that that's where we're getting the flavors that we like for that particular beer. Out of Blanca goes best in Tray. Tray is where we get those super lactic flavors coming out in August, and that's just, so anything I want to have that kind of a note, I've put it into those barrels. La Roja, we use used bourbon barrels, but I buy them from other brewers that are making bourbon-influenced beers. In Michigan, you've got Founders and New Holland, and right around the corner there's Goose Island. All these guys are producing a lot of great bourbon-influenced beers. So they're buying new, or freshly dumped rather, bourbon barrels regularly, producing a beer maybe 2 or 3 times in one of these barrels at most, and then they're done with them. So I call Alec up over at Founders and I say, hey, next time you're doing a run and dumping a bunch of barrels, give me a call and I'll bring them in. They still have a hint of bourbon in them, but that's the beauty of La Roja and using them for La Roja, is that every time we do a batch, we can have 1 or 2 of these newer barrels, but then when we go to blend a year later, you know, we're not taking all these bourbon-influenced barrels that maybe just have a hint of bourbon. We're taking a little piece of that, a little piece of this, and we can, again, create that into La Roja, where we're getting a consistent beer, and recycle those barrels again and again until they're neutral. And then at that point, we can experiment with some of our other seasonals in them. My philosophy on brewing beer is I am taking what I do, and for many years was making beer as a craft. Craft beer is very flavorful beers. But as a craft, there's you're an artisan, you're a craftsman, you're kind of making cabinetry or tables, and they're beautiful tables, beautiful cabinets, but that's a craft. And I wanted to take that craft and elevate it to an art form. And with Jolly Pumpkin, that's what I was trying to do, was to take this craft that I'd learned over the years. I learned how to make good, consistent beer, and I wanted to take that craft that I had learned and turn it into an art form. And so that's what we pursue at Jolly Pumpkin, is the artistic expression in beer. And I know some breweries who have taglines that bring art into the tagline, and that's fantastic too. But what we're trying to do is a little different than most other breweries out there. It's this balance of flavor and these layers of flavors, and creating this dynamic in every beer that we do that is intriguing, that is subtle, that is layered, and really leaves you thinking and trying to tie it all together, and has a wonderful finish, and when you're done, you'd like to have another one. And that's what we're trying to do, is take this craft and elevate it to an art where people are just blown away and in love with the beer because of the flavors. That's what I say again and again, it's about the flavors and creating the flavors, but because it's art, there's other aspects, there's visual, there's aromatics, there's all this stuff that's tied together. And how do you do that when you throw everything in oak with wild yeast and souring bacteria, and the temperature is out of your control and the wild yeast is somewhat out of your control, and it's a challenge, and that's where a lot of blending really comes into play. What I mean by blending is that we will have the same recipe of beer, and we'll brew it multiple times, and it'll go into a whole bunch of different barrels. And then we have two different blending programs. One is based on age, and one is based on sort of a batch format. And what we do is we have in our mind, I like to, when I design a beer, and even if it's a beer that we've been brewing for years, as our year-round beers or our seasonals, I have that end beer vision in mind. I can visualize what it looks like, how it smells, how it's going to taste. So when I'm blending, we'll take all these samples of different barrels. So let's take the example of La Roja. We brew La Roja all year, once a week, maybe once every other week we do a batch of La Roja. Same recipe, it goes into oak. The profile of La Roja that ends up in the bottle, it's a blend of the same beer but at different ages in the barrel. And so we'll pull samples of maybe 30, 40 different barrels, and I will taste all those samples. And in those samples, I will find the elements of what I want in that final bottle of La Roja. And so I will take individual barrels and I'll set them aside, and we'll do a little bit of a blend of different percentages, and I'll make maybe 3 or 4 of those blends up, and out of those 3 or 4 blends, I'll select what I feel is the best, the most representative of what we're looking for in La Roja. So that's one aspect of how we blend beer. The other is with our seasonals, where everything is produced in a relatively short period of time. Say Lucernaga this year, we did 22 batches of Lucernaga within 3 weeks. Then it all ages relatively close together in its period of time. Every one of those barrels is within 3 weeks of each other. And at the time that we need to blend and package, I'll go back through and I'll taste those again and blend. But most of the time, the batches that were brewed together get blended together. The only time that we don't is if we have sort of an aberrant barrel that has developed some sort of interesting characteristics, or characteristics that just don't fit. What I've discovered over the years of blending is that you can create a blend and you start adding flavors and beers in, and all of a sudden it falls apart and it doesn't work, and you're left wondering why. Was it the last piece of the puzzle, or was there a weak link in the center of the chain? And I have to go back and re-examine all those flavors and try to figure out where the problem is. And so sometimes in even these batch format, like the Lucernaga, I have to go back and say, this whole batch is great except for this barrel. It just does not fit. And then we'll package what does work, keep this barrel, and then we'll look at where we can fit that barrel, because every barrel tastes different, it develops differently. So those are the two different kinds of blending that we do, is things that are really drawn out in age, like La Roja, where we're taking beer that's well over a year and blending in some that may be as young as a couple of months and everything in between, and something that really has been brewed about the same time, and just trying to arrange the barrels into a coherent shape. Then, after we do this blending that we talk about, we blend back into a bottling tank, and we'll re-yeast with fresh yeast. We bottle with a separate strain than our primary brewing strain. We, for many years, did use our primary brewing strain, but we switched to this secondary strain because we were getting more consistent, better results with it. So we have a secondary clean strain that we package with. We add some priming sugar. We use dextrose because it ferments very cleanly. And at that point, I'm not looking to create additional unpredictable flavors. I have designed and blended this beer, and I would like it to just carbonate. You'll have some additional esters from the secondary packaging yeast, but that's what we know is going to happen, and that's why we've selected, one of the reasons we've selected the particular yeast we do use for bottle conditioning, is we like those flavors and what it brings out. And that's about it. Put it in a corner where it's sort of warm and wait and put a label on it and hope someone buys it. There are a few other people doing all oak beers right now, but when we started in 2004, to the best of my knowledge, we were the only U.S. brewer doing 100% oak-aged beer. And it's kind of funny because as other brewers have done all steel matured beer, fermented and matured beer, and started to venture into oak aging, as we've opened these pubs up, we've started to do, we've done all 100% oak. We've started to do now some non-sour beers for the pubs. The way the laws are structured in Michigan, we can only serve at our pub things that we produce. So I love IPAs. I know I brew all sour saisons and other style beers, but I love IPA too. So I would like an IPA at my pub. So when I go to my pub, I can have an IPA. So we brew, now we're brewing some beers that are matured in steel. We do them under different brand names than the Jolly Pumpkin though, so the person who buys a Jolly Pumpkin, they know they're getting an oak-aged beer. They know it's going to have some wild yeast influence. They know there's going to be some souring bacteria, and they know what they can get out of that beer. I like to consider myself a creative sort, so I come up with a number of different names depending on the beer and make up fake companies. So it'll appear that we've got other breweries on tap, and people will come in and they'll say, "What is Honu Honu Brewing?" And the bartenders just laugh, and it's like, "Oh, that's one of Ron's other breweries." And they're like, "He has another brewery?" And they're like, "It's in his head." So I come up with Honu Honu is one I do some things under. Tortuga Ale company, which I'm probably going to get sued over one day because there's a Tortuga Rum company. But until they do, I use Tortuga Ale for a chocolate stout that we do at the pub. Golden Manatee is another company that we've created that does all gluten-free beers. We have a gluten-free Belgian IPA at the pub that we're looking to start distributing as well. We've kind of created these alter egos for the non-sour beers. We also do a line of beers under the North Peak brand. One of our partners, who I mentioned earlier, who helped us and encouraged us to get these restaurants going, they own a brew pub in Traverse City called North Peak, and they've always wanted to distribute their beers. And so we've adopted their brand name for some non-sour beers that we brew as well. We do brew only one contract, and that's Leelanau Brewing Company. Charles Pasenko owns Leelanau Brewing Company. We started working with him maybe after our first or second year. He loved our Calabaza Blanca, thought it was a phenomenal beer, and he came to me and he said, "Ron, will you design a line of beers and brew them for me?" At the time we had plenty of capacity, and I said, "Sure." We've developed a tremendous friendship with Charles over the years. For his beers we do maybe 3-4 batches a year, really nice, very exclusive beers that he markets pretty well. It's been a great relationship over the years, and in fact so great that just last spring we hired Charles to work for us as our head of sales. So now he goes out and he officially promotes Jolly Pumpkin as opposed to when he was with Leelanau, and he would just always, give us a lot of props. We have so much fun at Jolly Pumpkin designing and creating new beers like most brewers, but we do have a few beers that we brew year-round that we really believe in and we think are fantastic beers. The first beer we ever brewed, Oro de Calabaza, is a strong golden ale, effervescent, champagne-like carbonation, tropical fruit notes from the Brettanomyces, peppery, spicy, really little bit of tartness in the finish, just really phenomenal beer. New York Times selected it as the best golden ale in the world. And we felt really flattered and honored because we put a lot into that beer. Second beer we ever brewed, La Roja. It's a sour, red, or amber colored beer, vaguely Flanders-esque in its character. That's been a great beer for us over the years. I think it really shows a lot of what we're trying to do. Another great year-round beer, Calabaza Blanca, the third beer we ever brewed. Belgian-style white, aged in oak, a lot of lactic character, so it's very tart, very refreshing. It's a great beer in the summertime, and it's also great brewing it in the summertime because the brewery is hot, the lactic acid bacteria and the wood is just really fired up, and it's almost as if it knows in August I need a really tart, refreshing beer because that's what comes out of the wood then. After those three, we introduced BAM beer. And I introduced BAM beer because although Calabaza Blanca was only 4.8% alcohol, the other two beers that we were brewing were 7 and 8% alcohol, and it was when extreme beers were all the rage and people were looking at what we were doing. Again, the only brewery, 100% oak aged, sour beer, and we were extreme. We were in that extreme category. I'm not about extreme, as we've been talking about. I'm about flavor and complexity, subtlety, and drinkability. And so I said, screw this, I am not an extreme brewer. And so I brewed BAM. It's a farmhouse ale. It's 4.5% alcohol. It's light, it's effervescent. We dry hop it. You have citrus notes in the aroma, other fruit notes in the aroma, and it's just this great, really drinkable, rustic style beer. And I said, there you go. There's your extreme beer. Open fermentation is something that I love. I love the flavors that are created with open fermentation, with our primary yeast strain. With the spontaneous fermentation and using the open fermenters as a coolship, that's something that we did for a number of years with our Lambicus beer, which we ended up with quite a few barrels of and only blended back down and released one batch of so far, which didn't carbonate because I used lambic that was too old, but it's a learning experience and there's not a lot of people you can ask about it. But I want to continue with the lambic project. It's difficult when our production is maxed out with the year-round beers to slip in a brew day of lambic. It's a very long day, but it is something that we'd like to continue. My initial goal with Jolly Pumpkin was to open the first all oak age brewery in the U.S. and also the first spontaneously fermenting brewery in the U.S. And while we achieved both of those goals, while we've been creating spontaneously fermented beer, we really haven't gotten it to market because our other wood-aged beers have really started to take off and taken so much time. And you know, it's sad, but the reality sometimes is these beers, although the Roja has year-old beer in it and they take a long time, the lambic, you're talking multiple years, and you know, I have to pay the electric bill next month, and you know, so you have to balance this. Because of my fermentation limit, I can only ferment a certain number of beers a week, and it's a very tough decision to say, okay, this week we're brewing lambic, and everybody loves it, so it's not tough in that way. Everybody has such a great time. It's a super long brew day. We do a traditional turbid mash, but it's when I've got 30 wholesalers calling me up saying, when is my BAM beer going to get here? I'm like, that is tough, because I do, you know, need to keep that beer going out a little bit. I'm really hoping with this expansion that we can start doing the Lambicus series again. We actually did one batch last year after taking a break for 3 years, so we have some younger stuff. The older stuff is just too old to be blended really well right now, so I think that it'll probably be another 2 to 3 years before we could see another Lambicus blend come out. And I'm hoping to take what we learned from it, the first blend, and make the second one that much better. Where am I going with Jolly Pumpkin is a really interesting question, and it's been on my mind a lot lately. We've expanded through the building that I was talking about, that warehouse building that we have, to the point where there's not any space left. We're at our capacity. I never really thought it would be as forefront on my mind as it is now, but I've always said I will brew as much Jolly Pumpkin as people want to drink. And I'm a brewer. I love brewing. I brewed every day for many, many years. Racked beer, bottled beer, that's what I do. And as our company has grown, I've become more and more leadership, managerial roles have become more of my roles, and I've had to kind of weed myself out of production every day because I have a lot of other things to do to keep the company running. I'm still in production 2 days a week, maybe 3 if I jump in on the bottling crew, and throughout the day certainly I help move pallets around and things, but I do a lot of management and leadership for the company and just trying to figure out where we're going. So we're at this juncture where we're looking to buy a new building, a much larger facility, and bringing in a bigger brew house, a couple of separate bottling lines for the non-sour and the sour beers that we do, the different brands that I had mentioned. It's a big jump for us. It's a big jump for me to go from the guy who makes the stuff to the guy who runs the company who makes the stuff. And so it's really something that I've been thinking about every day, but that's where we're going, is we're staying true to that vision of I will make as much of this wonderful beer that I love to make as you will drink.